Hey guys, Nick from KN Tech, welcome back. Well, welcome to part 3 of my how to build a PC video. If you haven't seen parts 1 and 2, I'll stick a link to a playlist in the top right corner so you can catch up on those. In this video we're going to be taking that PC which we built and tested on our tabletop or our work surface, and we're going to be transferring it into a PC case, getting all the cabling done and ready to install an operating system. Come along for the ride guys, we'll see how it turns out. Okay, so this is where we left it at the end of the last video. So we have our build already on our box, on our worktop, on our table, on our desk or whatever. We've already done a test, we've already plugged it into a screen so that we know everything works. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take some of the parts off of this. So like for example, we're going to take off the graphics card and we're going to take off the SSD and we're going to put it into a case. So I'm going to show you how you do that, show you how you put the power supply in. We're going to put some fans in the front and in the back so we can manage the airflow through the case. And we're also going to do a little bit of cable management. Nothing too special, but just something to make it look a little bit nice and tidy. So the case I'm going to be using today is this one. It's a Cooler Master Box 5. It's a reasonably good, decent starting case. It's not too expensive, it's kind of middle of the road, it's got good airflow, so it should have everything we need to get our build in a case and nice and tidy and looking pretty good. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take off the side panels and I'm going to lay the case on its side, and that way we can start seeing about getting the motherboard put in along with the power supply and all the peripherals. So now we can see inside the case, and we can see we have a power supply shroud at the bottom here, so all of the cables that are going to be coming out of our power supply are going to be tucked away and hidden from view. We also have a drive bay sled here. This is going to allow us to mount our drives in here, and again all the cables are going to come out the back of it. We also have a little SSD mount here, which is going to allow us to mount our SSD. A lot of the cases these days have multiple positions where you can put these in. So you can put them on the front, or you can put them on the back side of the actual case itself. Okay, so we've got the front and the back panel off now. So I'm going to take these cables and I'm going to get these out of the way. These are all the front panel connectors. So you've got things like your USB 3, your standard USB, your headphone and your microphone socket, and also your power switches. So I'm going to lay this down, and then hopefully I'm going to get it in such a way that you can see how I'm actually going to be getting the equipment put into the case here. Okay, so I've taken everything off the motherboard, and you can see right here, here's our motherboard that we had from the first build, and you can see I've taken out the graphics card and I've taken out all the power cables, so it's just the motherboard all on its own. You can see this motherboard actually comes complete with an I/O shield already built into it. A lot of the older ones tend to come with an additional plate which you need to put into the back of the machine. So what we're going to do is we're going to get this lined up and we're going to get it put into the case, screwed in place, and then we can start getting our peripherals and our accessories all put in. There we go. So now we've got 9 screws, and this is what's going to hold the motherboard in place inside the case. Okay, so that's our motherboard screwed in place. And if I stand the case up in the correct orientation, you'll see where it sits inside the case. So here we can see the motherboard is now in place, and we can now start working on getting the rest of our peripherals actually added in. So again, I'm just going to spin this around so it gives you guys a bit better review of me when I'm actually putting these parts in. I'm going to try and raise it up a little bit by standing it on the box as well. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the power supply in. In order to do this, I'm actually going to remove the power supply shroud, and in actual fact what I'm going to do is I'm going to stand it back up again, because when I move the power supply shroud, it's going to make things a little bit easier for you guys to see. So this one has a power supply shroud, which you can see on the bottom here, and it's a simple slide out. So I'm just going to slide it forward and take it out. This gives us a much better access to where the power supply is going to go along the bottom. Now, this particular case has a filter in the bottom, which means any dust that's going to get sucked up through the fan on the bottom is going to get caught by the filter, and it's not going to go through your power supply. In this instance, I would recommend mounting the power supply with the fan facing down, so it's taking fresh clean air from outside the case to help cool the components inside the power supply. Now in some cases they actually have a frame that sits around the power supply at the bottom, which means you can take that frame out and you can slide the power supply in from the outside. This one doesn't have one of these. This power supply actually gets mounted from the inside, which is why I took that power supply shroud out, which is going to give me a lot easier access to be able to get the power supply slid in from the inside. So let's take our power supply and we're going to offer it up. And once we've got it in the right place, we can then spin around and get to the back of it, and then we can get the screws in to hold it in place. So now we have our power supply in place. What we can do is we can take all of these cables and we can feed them through to the back of the case. Because that way we can then take the power supply through individually for the components we need, depending on where we actually want the power cables to come. So if we take these all through the back of the case, what we can then do is we can then put the power supply shroud back on, and you'll see what a good job that does of hiding all of the cables that come out of the power supply. Okay, so that's all of our cables out the back. Now what we can do is put our power supply shroud back on. And once we slide it in place, you can see it does a really good job of hiding all the cables that come out of the power supply. Now this particular case has a drive bay cage, which you can see at the front right here, and this one is actually movable, so you can actually move it to the left or to the right of the case depending on what you're going to be doing. Now if you're going to be using a custom water cooling loop or an AIO and you're going to mount the radiator on the front, you might want to move this drive bay cage over a little further nearer the power supply. If you're not, you can move it all the way to the front to give you a little bit more air around the power supply. Okay, so now we've got the power supply in the bottom of the case. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it back onto its back again, and we're going to get the video card mounted so that we can then start thinking about running our power cables to the different parts of the machine that we want to run the power cables in. You'll see this particular case has a lot of blanking plates along the back here where the graphics card is actually going to be installed. Some of these are press out and some of these actually come out with a crosshead screw. So I'll be taking out the ones that I need depending on the width of the card that I'm going to be using. So the card that I'm going to be using is this one, and this is the GTX 970, and we can see if we look at the end it's a 2-slot card, and we can see that because it has these 2 sets of pins here. If it was any wider with a third one, it would be a 3-slot, and that would mean we'd have to take 3 of the blanking plates out the back of the case, but in this case we can just get away with taking the 2. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take out these 2 blanking plates. Don't forget to hang on to these screws and these blanking plates. You'll need the screws to secure the graphics card. The 2 blanking plates, you might want to put them in your box that your motherboard came in, or maybe the box that your case came in, because if you ever want to get rid of your case, give it to somebody in your family or a friend or sell it somewhere, you're going to want to put these 2 back in so that it looks like it's still fresh and new. So we're going to grab the video card and we're going to slot it in just like we did on the test bench. We're going to slot it in, we're going to find where it slots into the motherboard, and again we're going to press it down until we hear a click. Just like that. Now we're going to take the 2 screws that came from the blanking plates, and then we're going to use them to secure the graphics card to the case right here. So that's our graphics card mounted, and you can see it's really quite sturdy. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to mount is the SSD, and we can see right here we have an SSD sled which is attached with a thumb screw to the chassis of the case. So we can go ahead and take that out, and this is what we're going to use to actually put the SSD into, and that's going to allow us to put it on the case either at the front or at the back depending on where we actually want to put it. In this case I'm going to leave it at the front. The interesting thing about these sleds that come with this Cooler Master case is these can actually take 2 SSDs. You'll see if I bring this up to the camera, there's a set of screw holes on the front and there's also a set of screw holes on the side. What this means is you can actually mount one SSD on the top of it like this, and then you can mount a second SSD on the inside like this. This means you can put 2 SSDs in each one of these sleds. That's a really good feature which I like about this particular case. In this case I'm just simply going to put the one on the inside, and then if I want to add one later I can put one on the outside. Of course, if I was being more careful about the aesthetics and the way this looked, I could have used the screws on the side so that when this sits in the machine you're not actually going to see the screws. Or I could have used black screws to kind of hide them a little bit more. It's time to get the SSD mounted in the case. We can see we have some holes here at the front, and this is where the SSD sled actually slits into. So I'm just going to go ahead, pop that in there, and then the thumb screw is just going to simply screw into the case at the top. I've made sure that the connectors for the SSD are on this side, so that means the cables can then come out and go through the back of the case and they won't be seen too much from the front. Okay, so we're at a point now where we could actually put all the cables in and we could turn our computer on and it's actually going to work. The only one thing we haven't looked at the moment is any kind of airflow to keep the components on the inside of the case cool. Now this case comes with a slot in the back where you can fit where you can fit a 120 or a 140mm fan, and it also comes with slots in the front that you can fit fans in as well. You can see right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the front mesh panel off, and then we can see a little bit better how we can put the fans on the front of the case. So right here we can see where we have the fans, where we have the fan mounts here. So we can put 120mm fans, or we can put the 140mm fans on here. Or if we wanted to, we can mount an all-in-one water cooler. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be putting a couple of 120mm fans at the bottom, and then the 120mm exhaust fan at the back at the top. That should give us reasonable good airflow because it's coming in at the bottom front of the case and going out at the back at the top. That way it should flow quite nicely across all of the components. I'm just going to go grab a couple of fans and I'm going to get these put in right now. So I'm going to be using some Be Quiet fans, purely and simply because I have a few of these on the shelf left over from a project that I did a little while ago. Again, you can use any kind of fan that you want. Some of them have RGB if you like that kind of thing, some of them don't. Some of them run at a high RPM and can be a little noisier, some of them run at lower RPM and can be less noisy. So it all depends on what you want and what you're looking for as to the particular fans you're using. Alright, I'm going to get these mounted in the case, and as soon as that's done, I'll be right back with you. Okay, we can see that we've got the fans in the front now, and I just thought I'd actually show you real quick before I put the fan in the back how to tell which way the airflow goes through on a fan. Now when you look at the fan, it's not that clear exactly which way the air is going to flow through it, because if it spins this way, the air is going to be coming towards you in the camera, and if it spins this way, it's going to be flowing away from you. It's really quite simple. There are two sides to the fan. The front side, which has no framing on it at all, and the back side of the fan has these four frames which actually hold the motor. The air always flows from the unframed side through to the framed side. So in this case, the air is going to be flowing from the unframed through to the framed side, so the air is going to flow this way. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in the back of the case for the exhaust. Now we have our case in the back that's going to act as an exhaust to allow the heat to come out of the case when it's passed over the main board. Okay, so now we have all of our components in our case. Now we can start getting our power cables done. What I like to do is I like to try and figure out where the power cables are going to go, and I usually do that in a size order. So the biggest and the thickest of the cables are what I usually plug in first, because that means I then got more room to move the smaller cables around them because they're not going to be quite so stiff and rigid. So the first thing I'm going to start with is the 24 pin, and then I'm going to start with the additional power supply for the CPU, which is going to go over in this top corner here. Then I'm going to do the power supply for the graphics card, and then I'm going to work on all the bottom connectors along the bottom. So most cases tend to have, they'll have little cutouts up here you can see where I'm going to actually pass the cables through. So for the 24 pin, for example, I'm going to be able to take it through this cutout up here, and I should be able to connect that in there, and that's going to make it look a little bit tidier because it's not going to have a big thick cable moving all the way across the front of the case. So there we can see that looks quite neat and tidy. Obviously if I'd have gone for some sleeve cables you wouldn't have all of this different colouring showing here, but for the moment that's going to do us just fine. Now I'm going to take the additional cable and I'm going to run it up to the power supply for the CPU. Okay, so you can see I've actually got the power main 24 pin in up here, and I've also got the EPS power put in up here. Now for the eagle-eyed members of you guys out there, and believe you me, I know you're out there, you'll notice that this power supply, this 24 pin, is actually a different one to the original one that I put in. The reason for that is because when I actually came to put the EPS power in at the top corner of the motherboard, the one from the power supply that I was using actually wasn't long enough to reach. So I've had to switch it out for a different power supply. Once we've got the main power cables dealt with, then what I like to do is I like to deal with the slightly less thicker ones. So in this case it's going to be the GPU. It's going to be the GPU power, and then I'm going to do the SSD power, and then the SSD SATA cables, and then I'm going to be able to deal with all the front panel stuff and then all the fan connectors. So let's go ahead and get that done right now. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get all the front panel connectors that we took out earlier on, and I'm going to attach these, and these normally fit in along the bottom of the motherboard. Again, check your motherboard manufacturer's manual to see where they actually go. Now some motherboard manufacturers, when it comes to putting in all your front panel connectors, so your power switch, your reset switch, your activity light, power light and hard drive light, some of them really make this job a lot easier for you by providing you with this. This is a small, I'm going to try and get the camera to focus in on it here, this is a small caddy, and this basically is what you put all of the front panel connectors in, and this will then slot straight into the motherboard in one piece. It stops you having to fiddle about with all of the little individual cables that go into it, and it also has what they actually are as well, so that makes life a lot easier. So I'm going to go ahead and use this because this was supplied with my motherboard. So I'm going to go ahead and plug the front panel connectors into this, and then we'll hopefully get them plugged in nice and simply. So there you can see they all go nicely into the little caddy there, and that just plugs straight into the main board. It does make life a lot easier. So that's everything all wired up, everything all plugged in and all cabled up. The only thing we need to plug onto the main board now are our fan cables, and we have these coming out the back of the case right here. And then what we'll do is we'll see if we can tidy up some of this cabling at the back to make it look a little bit neater. So I'm going to go ahead and plug these fan cables into the fan headers on the motherboard. Like I said earlier, make sure you check your motherboard manual so you know which ones are the fan headers and you know where you're going to be plugging them in. That's everything all plugged in and everything all wired up. The only thing I haven't done is put the dry bay cage back in, which I'm just about to do right now. So that's everything all dealt with on the front side. Now I'm going to spin it round and I'm going to show you how we can tidy up the cables on the back of the case a little bit. Obviously this is not a mandatory part of building a computer, but after a little while you start to begin to take a little bit of pride about how it looks, not just on the front side but also on the back side. One thing I highly recommend if you're going to be building computers and you're going to be doing a lot of PC building is you can't go wrong with a bag of cable ties, a small pair of side cutters. That allows you then to manage all the cables along the back, tie them off somewhere and snip off any of the excess. So I'm going to just lay this down right here. I'm going to take a quick look and see roughly where the cables are moving to and from so that I can have a look and see what I'm going to be able to make look a little tidier. And you'll see a lot of cases have these little places here where you can put cable ties through, and that kind of helps you to get some cable management going and get it nicely cinched down to make it look a little bit neater and a little bit tidier. Obviously it's not always possible to do it all the time, but it's always good to give a go. So I'm going to see if I can tidy these up a little bit. Once I've got this done, I'll come back to you. Okay, so there you have it, guys. I've done my my little bit of cable management right here. And you can see that basically what I've done is wherever the cables are routing, I've tried to keep all of the cables routing together. That way it keeps it a little bit clean. So I've kept all the front panel connectors and I've run them all along here and I've cabled them all up together. Nothing much you can really do about the big fat 24 pin and also these ones that go up for the EPS power for your CPU. But there's not much you can do about those, but you can actually have quite a clean look if you can just manage your other cables. So everything should be good to go. So I'm going to go ahead, put the back panel on, I'm going to put the front panel on, we're going to put a power supply in it, hook it up to a monitor, and fingers crossed everything should work. Okay, well I've got all the side panels put back on it. Now it's time to give it a go. So basically I'm going to do the same thing like I did last time. I'm going to hit the power supply, I'm going to be riding the delete button, and hopefully that's going to get me booted into BIOS. Way, there we go. And that's it. So there we go. So we've managed to boot into the BIOS with everything in the case. Everything's working. All our fans are turning, which if you look now you can see. Yeah, there you can see they're turning. And the fans at the back are turning. So that's got our airflow sorted. Well, so there you go, guys. That's the third part in my how to build a PC video. And you can see it's running quite nicely over there. All I've got to do now is install Windows and get that up and running. I may do a video about that a little way down the line. But for now, that's going to wrap up this one about how to build a PC. So I hope it's given you the confidence to maybe have a go at building one yourself, or maybe taught you a few little tips and tricks that I use when I'm building a PC. Don't forget to hit the like button if you liked the video. Don't forget you can catch up with the other two videos in this series by going to the how-to section of my build video series. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and don't forget to hit the bell notification mark so that way you get notified when I put more videos up. Thanks for watching, guys. As always, I'll see you on the next one.